Now, you may have already noticed that temperatures are dropping and golf courses are getting a little bit wetter, and that can only mean one thing: winter is coming. Well, in this video, we're being joined by Golf Monthly Top 50 coach Adam Harnett, who's going to talk us through 7 shots that you need to save your game this winter. We've also partnered up with Ping in this video. They've kitted myself and Adam out in their latest autumn and winter apparel to keep us nice and warm and nice and dry out on the golf course. We're at West Hill today. Let's get started. Right, Adam, so we're going to look at a couple of shots here that you're going to need in the winter, and that is out of some differing lies. Now, before we get onto the shot itself, let's talk about identifying a lie, how important that is, and how not a lot of golfers actually identify the lie before they go and hit their shot.
I see that so often. It's probably the biggest mistake amateurs make, is not looking at their lie before they pull their club. So they might get their yardage, they'll pull their club, and then they'll hit the shot, and they won't actually look at how the ball's sitting. It's probably the most important thing to do. You'll never see a good player not look at their lie before they hit it.
Listen, I'm criminal of this as well, so we're not alone. We've pulled out 2 lies here that we're going to get a lot in the winter. Let's start with this one on the left-hand side, a flyer lie. Now, let's talk about how to identify a flyer lie first and what it actually means.
Okay, so a flying lie is when the ball's kind of sat in the semi-rough and it's sitting up slightly. So it's almost like it's on a tee. And what that does, that reduces the spin on the ball. So when you strike the ball, it's going to actually fly a little bit further. So in the winter, that's actually quite a favourable lie to have. Where the ball's sitting up a little bit, we've got to be a little bit careful that we don't go underneath it.
Okay.
So, we're not necessarily trying to change too many things here, but one thing we can't do is be too steep and kind of chop down on this flying lie. So we'll be a little bit careful with the ball position. We may have the ball position even slightly forward of normal.
Okay.
Imagine the ball's on the tee, we kind of can sweep it up a little bit. So on this kind of lie, that's really helpful.
Right, so I'm going to get you to hit that in just a second, but let's talk about this lie on the right, and you'll get this a lot in the winter. It's not as wet at the minute, but it's sort of a bare lie.
One of the key things of this, different to the flying lie, is this one we actually need to hit a little bit more down on. We want to definitely get ball turf strike with this one. So 2 things I see golfers do that really you need to avoid. Number 1 is trying to kind of help the ball up off the ground, just through fear of hitting the ground and fatting it. So there's kind of a bit of a, we call it a miss radius, where the radius of the swing shortens and then we end up thinning and topping it. The other one is kind of a bit on our back foot. Again, trying to help the ball up in the air and kind of avoiding that muddy lie and avoiding the fat shot. Both of them actually cause problems more than they help. So certainly this one here where it's slightly muddy underneath, making sure that we're moving forward aggressively onto our front foot is really, really key. I'd say that's the most important thing to focus on when you swing through these shots. Let's give it a go.
I nearly had him. You can see how little spin that came out with and how much that sort of dug in.
Comes out really hot, again, in the winter. That's brilliant. We want our ball flying further, so this lie is actually quite a nice thing to have.
Okay, Adam, fairway woods and hybrids are really important to use well over the winter. Can you explain why a bit more carry distance through the air is so much more helpful, and then how to use these clubs more efficiently this time of year?
Yeah, so when we're faced with a situation where we've got a long iron in our hand or a long iron yardage, in the winter when the ground's a bit softer, one of the great things that the hybrids and fairway woods have is a much kind of wider, flatter sole to the club. Okay, so that helps with that softer ground. It glides through the ground much easier. So where we might normally take a 4 or a 5 iron in the winter months, we know the ball isn't flying quite so far. So it's a good idea to take out your hybrid or your fairway wood, and we can make a few adjustments for kind of replacing a fairway wood for a long iron in our setup and hitting our shots. So the key thing, the first thing I would say is it's actually not a bad idea to slightly grip down the club. Okay. So we might slightly grip down our hybrid or fairway wood just for a little bit more control. Now, it also takes a little bit of yardage off.
Yeah.
So if we're not trying to hit, let's say, our 4 iron normal distance, and our hybrid normally goes further than that, just gripping down gives us a little bit more control, and also just helps it not fly too far through the air.
Right, so the next shot, Adam, that's going to save golfers out there this winter. This might sound really obvious. We're not reinventing the wheel here. It's quality of strike.
Yeah.
Now, from this range, we're 150 yards and in. This is a really important scoring area. So how do we have better strike in the winter? And can you give us a drill that people can go away with and practice at home, on the range and on the course?
Absolutely. I mean, when the ground's wet, one of the things golfers don't like doing is hitting the ground, right?
No.
Because their relationship with the ground normally isn't a good one, okay? So we need to make sure that we're hitting the ground in the right place, okay? We all know that we're supposed to be hitting the ball and then the ground, okay? Ball turf contact is what we're looking for. So a really simple drill for this would be making some practice swings before you hit the ball, which many golfers don't do anyway.
Yeah.
But focusing on where you're making contact with the ground. So as I'm making my practice swing, I'm trying to make contact with the ground forwards of the golf ball.
Any particular distance in front? Do you pick a spot in the turf?
Not particularly. I'm just making sure that my contact is anywhere from the golf ball up. That's going to ensure, that the downward hit we're looking for, and it'll really stop golfers kind of backing up or lifting or trying to scoop the ball off the wet ground. Sometimes I might lay a towel down on the range.
Yeah.
You might lay just a towel behind here and swing through and try to miss the towel effectively, hitting the ground forwards. And then, you can bring that into your practice swings on the golf course, and then you can bring it into your real shots when you're actually playing.
That's a really good tip. And we've said this already, but quality of strike is so important in the winter. You can get away with a scabby one in the summer, can't you?
Yeah.
It might run, but like in this hole, uphill, bunkers in front, you're gonna need that quality of strike. So think about that when you're on the course and when you're practicing at the driving range. Okay, Adam, so we're working our way up the hole now, and an important shot to save you this winter is that 60, 70, 80 yard pitch shot that when the ground gets really soft, it's actually really hard to hit. A lot of people start fatting them. So can we talk about how to avoid the fat shot and to get these scoring shots as tight as possible?
Absolutely. The most common thing I see with this type of shot with a wedge in our hand is golfers that get kind of very, very narrow, meaning the club sort of comes in towards them. The shaft gets quite vertical, and then they kind of come down too steep and chunk.
That's where that fat, especially when the ground's soft and wet and horrible.
Absolutely.
It's going nowhere.
So we want to try and create more width with this shot. And one thing I would always say is never make a full swing, an absolute full swing with a really lofted club. And the reason being is when we're making a real full swing, it's easy for the club to come in too narrow and come down too steep. So I always think a 3/4 swing is absolutely a must when we're playing these shots. If that means you've got to change wedge, then do so. Okay. But a way I really like, a nice feeling or a drill, if you like, or a nice feel, is that when we make our backswing, we should have enough width in the club head here that if we take our right hand off, we can't reach the club head. Okay. To me, that shows we've got a nice amount of width. So from there, we can come in kind of shallower and kind of pick the ball off nicely, using the bounce on the club, and avoid that kind of leading edge digging into the ground.
Right then, Adam, we found ourselves in a bunker, which you might do in the winter and the summer, but a difference in the winter is the lie. Yep. A lot more compact, a lot less sand most of the time when it's wet. Let's talk about identifying the lie and how to play out of it when there's not a lot of sand under the ball.
When it's compact and hard like this, it's very different to when it's sitting fluffy. Okay, when it's sitting fluffy, we want to use the bounce of the club, right? Which is the sole, kind of the rounded bottom of the sole is the bounce, and that stops the club from digging into the sand. Okay. Okay. Now, of course, when it's hard like this, if we have too much of a bounce angle on the club, we're going to bounce up off that hard pan into the middle of the ball, and it's going to thin. Yes. Okay,
that's the common shot I have in these sort of situations.
So the things we need to change, first of all, we need to make sure we've got a wedge in our bag that has a low bounce. So that's going to be a number like a 6 or an 8 degree of bounce. Yep. And that's going to keep the leading edge down in the sand. It's going to stop it from coming up too high to prevent those sort of thin shots. In this scenario, we actually want to encourage the leading edge to dig a bit.
Any setup changes for when it's compact under
yeah, like absolutely. This? So with a normal bunker shot, we would normally set ourselves up and have the ball a bit forwards, the face a little bit open. And of course, when we open the face, we expose more bounce. Sure. We definitely don't want to do that in this scenario.
Interesting.
So having the ball maybe a little bit more central and squaring the face up. Squaring the face up helps the leading edge kind of get into the sand much easier. Yeah. An opening club is always going to expose more. A closing club is almost like a bit of a digging tool. Yeah, see what it's actually useful in this situation. Absolutely, and we want to get the bounce going down, or the leading edge, going down into the sand. Brilliant, so really useful tips there.
Okay, we were in the bunker, Adam, talking about bounce. We're now out of it. We're going to talk about it again with these two different chip shots here. Yep. So we've got a buried lie in the wet rough.
Yes.
And a tight lie, but the ground's still pretty wet.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, again, how we identify what bounce to use in what situation.
So what I'd say is, whenever we're out now, we're on the grass, we're on soft ground, right? So we no longer need to dig, we don't want to dig.
No.
So we're trying to avoid using a wedge with low bounce. Very different to when we're on that hard pan bunker shot out there.
Especially out of this lie we've picked here, which is a bit buried down in some wet rough.
Yeah.
You do want to interact with the ground,
yes,
but going through it and not digging into it, right?
Exactly. So we still need a little bit of a downward angle because the ball's sat down in the grass, right? So we've got to get down to the bottom of the ball, but we don't want low bounce at the same time, because as coming down, we're just going to dig.
Brilliant.
Right? So with a bit of bounce on that club at a steeper angle, we won't dig in, but we will pop the ball out.
Okay, so that's a shot you're going to need in your bag, definitely over the winter. Let's move to this lie here. We're not far off here.
Yeah.
But almost a different shot entirely, right?
Yes.
A tighter lie, but we've still got some wet ground.
Yes.
So how would you say people go about this one?
So again, high bounce. We want to use the bounce of the club. But one thing I like golfers to try and get comfortable doing on these sort of shots is getting comfortable hitting the ground and feeling how it's going to interact.
Okay.
Right, so I've just made a little swing there. I've hit the ground, but because I've hit with the back or the underneath of the club, it hasn't dug in. So if you're comfortable hitting the ground, knowing that it's not going to dig, then the bounce will work for you. You'll slide through and you'll be able to hit decent shots in the wet conditions.
Okay, now I like, especially on this shot here, it's a decent way away, but nothing to go over off a thin lie.
Yeah.
Maybe getting something like an 8-iron out, but can you just chat about the bounce, if there is any on here, and how that might interact differently with this?
Yeah, sure. So with a flatter face club on this kind of lie, we really want the club working very much shallow, almost like a putting stroke in a way. We want to get away from any steep angle that's going to potentially dig that into the ground. Now, our irons, typically, we want to take a bit of a divot in a full swing, right?
Right.
But when we're around the greens like this, we don't really want that. So keeping that moving nice and level with the ground, if you catch it slightly thin, that's better than catching it slightly fat.
Definitely.
Okay, because we're trying to get the ball out low and rolling.
Right then, last but not least, Adam, we made it to the green, finally.
Yep.
And come winter, and especially coming out of some of the greens are really quick, it can be tough on these long putts to get yourself to hit it hard enough or get the pace right when they're a bit slower, a bit wetter, less firm.
Absolutely.
So what kind of tips can you give us to get better at these sort of lag putts in the winter? Yeah,
so what I see a lot of golfers do when the greens start to get a bit slower and they've got longer putts uphill in the winter is they tend to try to accelerate really fast and kind of add a hitting motion. Okay. Now, to be a good putter and control your distance, we want the putter moving at a nice constant speed, all right? So we don't want the club coming back and then suddenly accelerating. And that's a real temptation when the greens are a bit slower, right? So to combat that, I want golfers to be a little bit more aware of the length of their stroke. Okay, so we want the backswing and the downswing to kind of be the same tempo, the same speed. We don't want to be going back slow and then really accelerating. It's really easy to over-egg it then with that sudden rate of acceleration. So we want a nice constant speed, and the way we're going to do that is matching up the backswing length with the length of putt we've got, effectively.
Oh, cozied up nicely. Have a look for us.
Not
Just
bad.
missed, but I'd say that's a gimme on the way back. So a great tip there from Adam, really think about that putting stroke even more in the winter on these long putts on wet greens. Massive thanks to Adam for joining us in this video. Some really, really useful advice there. But for now, from West Hill, we'll see you next time.